Welcome to the final part of What If Ultron was the main villain of the first MCU saga, which is Phase 3. Let's begin, shall we? The first movie is Avengers vs. X-Men. The movie would have an identical plot to Captain America's Civil War. But here's the thing. With the X-Men involved, the X-Men have gained new members since the first movie. Those new members would be Iceman, played by Lucas Till, Sunspot, who I think could have still been played by the same actor who played him in Days of Future Past. Kitty Pryde, I would say probably Millie Bobby Brown, perhaps. Emma Frost, who I could definitely see being played Jennifer Lawrence, and she would have been set up in X-Men 1, as appearing as like a little girl, you know. Bishop, who I think could have still been played by Omar Sy. And Banshee, who I think could have still been played by Caleb Landry Jones. Now, essentially, they would fight villains like Avalanche and Blob at the start. Blob, I could definitely see being played by Brendan Fraser. As for Avalanche, maybe someone like Derek Mears, perhaps. Now, the Avengers would still have their encounter with Crossbones, but Crossbones lives. One of the new members of the Avengers would be Wonder Man, who would be playing Nathan Fillion. The whole Accord storyline would be changed. It extends to the X-Men. Because if the X-Men decide to assign the Accords, they will have to team up with the Avengers at a certain point in time, which they don't want to. And if they refuse, they will have to give up their mutant powers from the mutant cure, which would have been created by Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister, who would be set up in this film. As for Mr. Sinister, I could see Bryan Cranston or John Hamm playing him. And of course, Boulevard Trask would also appear in this movie. I think Peter Dinklage could have still played Boulevard Trask. And he would be one of the villains in this movie. Now, the whole airport, Spider-Man would still be introduced. This would still be Spider-Man's introduction. But the fight would be different at the airport. The fight would be the Avengers fighting certain members of the X-Men. Captain America, Cyclops, Iron Man, Wolverine, Storm, Thor, Hulk, Beast, War Machine, Bishop, Hawkeye, Iceman. I thought Iceman versus Spider-Man at first because of their friendship in the comics, but okay, maybe okay, yeah. One of the new members would be Gambit, who I could see being played by someone like Austin Butler or still Channing Tatum, I don't know. But he would fight Gambit, whereas Spider-Man would fight Iceman. It would be heartbreaking because they're friends in the comics. Ant-Man the Wasp. For Ant-Man, I would see him fighting Sunspot. As for Wasp, she would fight Emma Frost. Black Widow would fight Jean Grey. Apparently I didn't think about Thor and Hulk appearing, but yeah. So the whole conflict with the storyline, the whole storyline between the Avengers versus X-Men, that's changed to where instead of the Phoenix Force, it's the Accords. Winter Soldier would appear too, but he's not involved. He doesn't appear till like later on. Same thing with Falcon. I could possibly picture Falcon fighting Colossus. Now, the final battle would basically be the Avengers having to put their differences aside with the X-Men because Baron Zemo and Bolivar Trask have unleashed some Sentinels, and so they have to team up to stop the Sentinels. Now, I could picture possibly Winter Soldier, Wonder Man versus Banshee at this airport fight, with Mockingbird having to deal with Scarlet Witch, and Scarlet Witch and Wonder Man would begin to develop a relationship, like in the comics. Now, apparently during the final battle, Jean and Banshee would both die. Nah, Jean dies. Jean would sacrifice herself to stop the Sentinels. Baron Zemo would get away, whereas Bolivar Trask would be caught and arrested. The movie would have a bittersweet ending because the Avengers are disassembled, and the X-Men are mourning Jean's death. And Emma Frost would try to help Cyclops get over Jean's death, because earlier in the film there would be a love triangle between Jean, Emma, and Scott, which puts Emma at odds with Jean, causing them to be frenemies, leaning more towards a rivalry of sorts. The after credits scene would set up the Dark Phoenix storyline. And of course, when Hank and Janet return home, they find Ultron gone, hinting that he escaped. Next movie is Captain America Mad Bomb. This would be based off of the original story that was planned for Captain America Civil War. Elements from Civil War would be taken, like Baron Zemo as the main villain, Crossbones and Baron von Strucker as secondary villains. Captain America's team would be Winter Soldier, Falcon, Black Widow, and Hawkeye, and Mockingbird. Captain America and Black Widow would begin to develop their relationship more. We would see of their relationship beginning to develop. At the end, Baron Zemo, Crossbones, and Strucker would be defeated. Well, Strucker escapes. His return would set up a future film later in Phase 3. Next movie is Doctor Strange. It's just the same movie, honestly. Next movie is Iron Man 3. My least favorite of the Iron Man trilogy. I don't like this movie at all. I hate this film. I'd call this the second worst of the Infinity Saga, right next to Captain Marvel. But let's just move on, shall we? Instead of the beginning taking place in 1999, the beginning would instead feature Iron Man fighting different villains like Blizzard, who I could see being played by Kane Hodder, Crimson Dynamo, and Ghost, since she was originally a villain of Iron Man in the comics. We still don't know that she's Egghead's daughter yet. That's going to be a twist for Ant-Man 3. And of course, Madame Hosk would also be one of the villains at the beginning. This would be a montage sequence, because it's cool. And of course, Trevor Slattery would not be in this movie at all. He would be replaced with Wenwu, the real Mandarin. And Aldrich Killian would be replaced with Ezekiel Stane, who I could definitely see being played by Alden Ehrenreich, who wants revenge on Iron Man for the death of his father. Thus, it brings the trilogy full circle. Now, it would be established that in between Masters of Evil and this film, Iron Man and Pepper got married, and Pepper is expecting Tony's child. It's an early pregnancy, though. Now, Harley Keener would be aged up a bit, understandable, and would become Iron Lad in this film. They would stop Mandarin and Ezekiel stay in the end. Mandarin would be captured, but Ezekiel dies. Also in the beginning, Mad Mask would be a secondary villain, with Firepower also returning this film. Now the ending would be different. Instead of Tony giving up being Iron Man, instead of the whole arc reactor thing becoming pointless, Iron Man does retire. Tony does retire from being Iron Man, but to start a family. At the end, Morgan Stark would be born, and this would allow Iron Lad, Harley Keener, to become the new Iron Man. Next movie is X-Men Dark Phoenix. I like Iron Man 3. I try to look at this movie from different angles because I seriously hate Dark Phoenix, the movie. But I came to the conclusion, yeah, I'm going to have to rework the whole thing because one of my biggest problems with this movie was the inclusion of the villain being an alien. Like, when you look at the X-Men movie franchise by Fox, it's a superhero franchise, not a sci-fi franchise. And when New Mutants began to be a horror movie, I questioned, did they forget the point of this franchise? It's a superhero franchise, not a sci-fi franchise or a horror franchise. So the movie would have a similar plot to Bryan Singer's version of X-Men The Last Stand, the movie we should have gotten back in 2006 instead of The Last Stand, with some differences. First of all, the movie would take place after Avengers vs. X-Men, and the original trilogy cast would be with this MCU version of the MCU's cast. Emma and Scott would begin to develop a relationship. When Jean is revived, she makes it her goal to kill Emma so she can be back with Scott forever and ever. Some of the new members would be Angel, who I think could have still been played by the same guy who played him in X-Men, Apocalypse, and Dark Phoenix, and Cannonball, who I could see being played by Sam Claflin. The Hellfire Club would be the villains, with Sebastian Shaw, who I could see still being played by Kevin Bacon as the villain. Other members would be Azazel and Riptide, as well as Mastermind, who would have been a new member of the Brotherhood of Mutants working for the Hellfire Club as a spy. This would also bring the Brotherhood back, but they're more so secondary villains. A new member, and of course, there would be a plot twist involving Nightcrawler, in which Mystique and Azazel are revealed to be his parents because Azazel got Mystique pregnant with Nightcrawler. And apparently Scott would be fighting Jean, trying to break her free. And in the end, it's successful, but the Hellfire Club is destroyed, with Emma sacrificing herself to contain the Phoenix Force, like the latter of which being like in the series finale of Wolverine and the X-Men. Banshee would also die. In the end, Sky and Jean decide to get back together and they share a kiss. The after credits scene would show Nathaniel Essex becoming Mr. Sinister, and this would set up a future storyline dealing with him, because Essex would play a big role in the story. Next movie is Spider-Man Homecoming. Movie is the same, except the scene with Ultron's head would be dropped because Ultron would still be alive. Iron Man has a smaller role because he's retired, but Spider-Man would meet him from time to time. And Tony would still create the Iron Spider suit for Peter. And Peter would also get to meet Morgan, who would be a year old by this point in time. Next movie is Thor Ragnarok. Movie is the same, except the after credits scene is changed to where instead of a ship, they would run into Ultron and his bots. Enchantress would also be in this movie, so she would meet Scourge since they're partners in the comics. And Sif also appears to form a love triangle between Amora, Thor, and Sif. But in the end, Sif wins Thor's heart. Next movie is Black Panther. Movie's the same except Storm would appear and this would form a love triangle between Nakia, Storm, and T'Challa. Claw also would return. Now, if some of you are asking, does T'Chaka still die in Captain America 3 or Avengers vs. X-Men? Yes, he still dies. At Avengers vs. X-Men still. And of course, Storm would not appear at all during the events of X-Men Dark Phoenix. No, she would appear. This would be more of a setup to that movie. Thus, I'm breaking the movie down into a big timeline of sorts. I might make a video about the timeline of this version of the MCU in the future. I might. Now, Killmonger would also have feelings for Nakia because he decides that if T'Challa gets Storm, Nakia will be his. But other than that, movie is the same. And of course, we get to learn more about Storm's backstory. Next movie is Ant-Man and 3, which would be Ant-Man the Wasp, Micromania. In this movie, Hank Pym would pass the mantle of Ant-Man down to Scott Lang, who is under house arrest. And of course, we get to see more of a relationship between Henry Jr. and Cassie grow. The plot would basically be similar to Nando V Movies' version of Ant-Man 3, which is the version of Quantumania we should have gotten. The only difference is that Black Ant would be replaced with Ghost, who would be revealed to be the daughter of Egghead, and is working with MODOK, who would instead be played by Jim Carrey. Ultron would also appear, and apparently he would kill MODOK and decide to make Ghost work for him, and at the end, Scott, Hank, and Janet all get, as well as Henry Jr. and Cassie, they all get trapped in the quantum realm. Well, Henry Jr. and Cassie are forced to live with their other members. Henry Jr. would live with his aunt and uncle, his grandparents, who I could see being played by Michael Douglas and Michelle Pfeiffer. Those would be Mr. and Mrs. Van Dyne. Cassie would be living with her mother because of their single parents' absence. Now, I know I said Maggie died, so maybe instead of Maggie, this could be Maggie's sister. Thus, this would be Cassie's aunt. Next movie is Avengers Age of Ultron. The movie would begin with Ultron attacking the Asgardians, with Enchantress also escaping. Now, Ultron would kill Loki differently. He would have a fight with Loki, but he kills Loki by, I guess, blasting him. And Ultron just wants to he just wants to kill everyone. And so he tries to kill Thor and what's left of the Asgardians, but they escape. I could possibly picture Ultron killing Loki by stabbing him with Heimdall's sword as a alternative. Tony Stark is out of retirement thanks to Harley Keener needing help. Scott, Hank, and Janet would escape the micro realm. Not a lot of the character stories change, except it would be revealed that in between films, T'Challa and Storm have began dating and are going to get married. This, of course, would lead to the X-Men appearing. Now, apparently at the end, the heroes lose in the Battle of Wakanda because the same people that got dusted die. They get murdered. Except for Spider-Man, Iron Lad, and T'Challa. They would live. The reason why I'm keeping T'Challa alive is because I feel like killing him off twice just made no sense. Also, Spider-Man was meant to be the next big hero of the MCU, and the fact that he died in Infinity War that doesn't make sense. He was meant to be the next big hero. The after credits scene would still show Nick Fury trying to contact Captain Marvel before he is murdered by an Ultron bot. And Ultron would now be the king of Wakanda. Next movie is Black Widow. Movie is identically the same, except Melina would start off as a villain, known as Iron Maiden, and Yelena would start off as Crimson Widow, and Strucker would replace General Dreykov. And apparently Taskmaster would kill Strucker so he can avenge the deaths of his father and sister. Yes, Taskmaster is a male who would be played by Jason Statham, who wants to avenge the deaths of his father and sister. He tries to kill Black Widow, but ends up slashing Yelena's arm. Tries to kill both Yelena and Natasha, but ends up killing Iron Maiden and is stopped in the end. In an after credits scene, we would see the Winter Guard. Now, the way Taskmaster would be defeated would be Red Guardian punching him and beating him. Now, some of the Winter Guard would be Ursa Major, Sputnik, who I could see being played by Doug Jones, and Crimson Dynamo. They would go to Wakanda to find out that it's been overtaken by Ultron and his minions. And so they meet Black Widow. Next movie is Captain Marvel. Movie's mostly the same with a few different changes. First of all, Rogue would appear, and I could see her being played by Catherine Langford. And the movie would take place in the before Age of Ultron. And of course, Rogue would start off working for the Skrulls, but then she would betray them, and the Skrulls would get into a fight with the Kree. Yeah. And of course, Rogue would help Captain Marvel take down Yon-Rogg. Next movie is Avengers Endgame. The movie begins right after Black Widow ended in Captain Marvel's after credits scene. They begin to devise a plan how to stop Ultron. It would even be established that Ultron murdered Ramonda. And of course, Rogue would also join the Resistance, and we would see signs of Rogue and Gambit developing a relationship. Ultron also would have been established to get his hands on the Sentinels and reprogram them to do his bidding after murdering Bolivar Trask. And essentially, they need to stop Ultron and his minions. There would be a battle where the heroes fight off the Ultron army. However, there would be some casualties, like, for example, Iceman would die, and Quicksilver would sacrifice himself to undo the terrible future. and then the final battle would start at all the way back at Wakanda. So yeah, some elements from the Days of Future Past movie would be taken, and of course the final battle would be epic. There would be some casualties though, like Black Widow and Angel. Now, when it comes to the final battle between Ultron would become a gigantic kaiju beast. Like in the concept art, would start attacking everyone. Ant-Man would sacrifice himself to deactivate this form. Hank Pym would die. And then Iron Man would sacrifice himself to defeat Ultron once and for all. A funeral would be held for all the people that died. Wonder Man would become Vision after sacrificing his life force into one of the Ultron bots, and he and Scarlet Witch would make out. T'Challa and Storm would get married. Hawkeye and Mockingbird are all revealed to be expecting their first child, which would set up Hawkeye. The Cap and Hulk moment remains the same. Thor's moment is that he is enjoying himself and he is now crowned the king of New Asgard with Sif as his queen. Janet would give her suit to her son Henry, thus setting Henry up to be the successor of his parents. And Cassie would also be set up to become Stature, to become her father's successor. And the X-Men would also attend the wedding of T'Challa and Storm. Same thing with what's left of the Avengers. In terms of Spider-Man's moment, he talks with Happy, Morgan, who would be a little older maybe, Pepper, Harley Keener, and Rhodey that he's sorry about what happened to Tony. And then they tell him that it wasn't his fault that, Iron Man died. And Spider-Man would then find the Iron Spire suit and decide to make it more accurate to the comics, being more of a red and gold suit. And he decides to fight some villains, like Prowler and the Chameleon, as well as Beetle. Next movie is Spider-Man Far From Home. Movie's almost the same, except Chameleon and Beetle, who would be revealed to be Janice Lincoln, would have larger roles. So that's what if Ultron was the main villain of the first MCU saga. I might do a what if Thanos was the main villain of the second MCU saga in the future, but I'm going to have to wait for Black Lion to make his version first. Just keep in mind, franchises that would continue would be Avengers, Spider-Man, X-Men, Thor, Doctor Strange, Captain Marvel, and Black Panther. While a new franchise would happen, Shang-Chi, as well as Guardians of the Galaxy and Fantastic Four. So yeah, expect those in a sequel, which covers what Thanos was the main villain of the second MCU saga. Anyways, bye.